I suppose this is your first CS course, more or less. Good, so I will be initiating you into the business of civilization studies. As you know, initiations can be painful. And the more painful, the more rewarding the business is. If you look at this first slide, you see a different form of pain, the pain of departure, of death. This is why everyone is in anguish, except for the guy dressed in white in the middle, who's very sober. This is Socrates. Socrates was condemned to death by the newly re-established democracy of Athens for corrupting the youth and reinstating or introducing new gods to Athens. But he doesn't seem to be bothered much by the idea of death. Actually, he's looking forward, I should say upward, to it, because downward there's only, as the other hand is gesturing, there seems to be only poison. Now, this is an image of Plato, of Socrates, which we have from Plato. And Plato is extremely influential. The symbolism here is very powerful, because here we have a separation, a cleavage into two realms. A realm of reality, which is really real, and a realm of, let's call it a surrogate reality. So we have on the one hand the world of ideas, and on the other hand the world of things which mimic these eternal ideas. This comes to us from the very powerful impact of Plato. And here's a statement by Emerson, who's telling us that Plato is philosophy, and philosophy is Plato. Of course, he's exaggerating, but there's nothing unscientific about exaggeration. As you can see, it's very powerful. Another guy says, Whitehead, that the whole tradition of philosophy can be thought of as a series of footnotes to Plato. Of course, again, this is an exaggeration. But I think we should be fine with exaggeration, as long as we realize that it's exaggeration. The image, again, is very powerful because of its originator. And here's another image by the same originator. This is the cave, the simile of the cave. You might be familiar with it. So Plato, or Plato's Socrates, imagines us sitting in a cave with fire behind us, which casts shadows, and we take these shadows to be the real world, our virtual reality in which we dwell. And we take it as final. But then some guy leaves the cave and gradually goes out of the cave into the utmost reality where he sees the sun, or she sees the sun. And then he goes back, or she goes back, and tells these people that you weren't living in a real reality, whatever that is. And this is, again, a very powerful image that the different religious constructs will try to appropriate. The different stages through which the philosopher has to go through in order to leave the cave are stages of knowledge, are degrees and advances in knowledge. And ultimately, the highest level of knowledge is a kind of ascent. It's a kind of knowledge which is beyond reason, which is beyond the intellect. It's some kind of ascent. Think of, you know Oogway, right? From Kung Fu Panda? No? Shame on you. Haven't you seen this scene with the nice music by Hans Zimmer, where Master Oogway, having arrived at wisdom, finally ascends to the real world full of wisdom, and he's very calm. It's a very powerful image, and he conveys his final lessons to Master Shivu, who will have to tolerate Kung Fu Panda. Anyhow, so this is a kind of union that you arrive at ultimately. This is a kind of realm which is supra-rational. What happens here is that, according to Plato, the soul has been released from its prison, the body. And only by being released from its prison, it will arrive at real knowledge. Anyhow, again, Plato is extremely influential. Look at this image, 16th century, early 16th century Italy, Raphael. And this is called, this painting, the School of Athens. In it, you see most of the famous or the most celebrated philosophers of antiquity. And in the middle, you see Plato, the guy who looks like Da Vinci with a white beard. Next to him, you see someone else, Aristotle. So the center stage is not simply occupied by Plato, but there is someone else. Here's a modern depiction of the school of Athens. There's no hierarchy here. It's just that everyone is contributing equally, everyone is forging forward. Even Al-Ma'arri, who's blind, the guy with the cane on the right, the author of this caricature calls it continuum. And this is another conception of philosophy. But let's get back. Let's have a look at Plato and Aristotle. Doesn't help. Here. So again, Plato, the guy with the white beard, the finger pointing upward. Remember the first slide with Socrates pointing upward towards the realm of reality, of truth. Plato is concerned with this world. He dismisses this world of ours because it's merely an impediment. And in his hand, he holds his famous book, the Timaeus, which was translated into Arabic as the Timaeus. Whereas Aristotle is gesturing forward towards this world which is filled by the senses. And in his hand, he has his famous book, the Ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics, which is not completely worldly, but it takes this reality on its own terms. It starts from this reality, this world of ours, which is not eternal, which is not immutable, has value on its own. And Aristotle, it seems like a division of labor, a neat division of labor, but perhaps there's a deeper disagreement here. Much of the later tradition will try to reconcile these two approaches, the one which is overwhelmed by the reality of the ideal world, the world of forms, as Plato calls it, and the one which is concerned for this world, with this world for its own sake, but that will try to move from this world towards the world of forms, in some sense, to put it very simply. Aristotle, because of his concern with this world, developed the methods which would allow us to study it, the analytical methods, the causal analysis of the world. And he almost single-handedly established much of the norms and the methods and the scopes of perhaps all of the disciplines, the scientific disciplines which people concern themselves with for 1,000 years. This is not to say that he's not relevant today. Definitely not. Aristotle is not just an issue of history. People still resort to Aristotle to find answers. Anyhow, he did this without any help, any divine help, any revelation, which is an impressive feat. Some of the ideas that we find in Aristotle and in Plato, you will find repeatedly in the authors that you will be reading. For example, the question of the syllogism. Have you heard of the syllogism? I'll give you an example of a syllogism. Back to Kung Fu Panda. So you say all pandas are awesome. Po is a panda, of course, the Kung Fu Panda. So Po is awesome. This is why you call it the legends of awesomeness, right? So we have a general premise, all pandas are awesome. Where did we get that? Aristotle assumes that you get this through scientific study, which allows you to arrive at the nature of the thing, at the essences of the thing. And you do this in every discipline or in every scientific field according to the method of the scientific field. There's a major misconception about the syllogism. It really polarized people. So in modernity, if you would ever take CS3, you would see Bacon complaining that this does not produce knowledge. We already know the result. We already know that Po is awesome if we know that all pandas are awesome. But this was not the intention of Aristotle. Aristotle never claimed that the syllogism produces knowledge. Aristotle would say that the syllogism is like a filter. Once you have arrived at the nature or the essence of pandas, you fit your knowledge in this form, the syllogism, and you see if it's logically congruent, if it's logically proper. So it's like a filter. Filters are not supposed to produce the coffee. They just exclude what is not coffee. But this is a major misconception. Again, it really polarized people. Anyhow, the logic of Aristotle contains much more than the syllogism. We'll look at it in a moment, part of it. But Aristotle was concerned with some issues that earlier philosophers have brought up, like Parmenides and Heraclitus. To go back to Plato, the debate really centered on the question of what is real. How do we tell what is real from what is illusory? Reality, illusion. For Parmenides, everything is static. Movement or motion is a kind of illusion. For Heraclitus, actually, everything is in motion. Anything that is static is merely an illusion. How do we reconcile these? I mean, if you think of it as worthwhile to reconcile the attitudes, Aristotle definitely thought so. Plato's synthesis or reconciliation actually admitted a world which is real and static, and another world, to call it roughly a world, which is mutable and ephemeral. So both of these apply to different parts of reality. Again, the basic cleavage that I discussed initially. Aristotle attempts a different move. He makes a distinction between the form of the thing and the matter of the thing, like the shape of the thing and the stuff which it is made of. And his intention is to say that in any motion there is something which remains there, which does not change. You have a lump of candle, for example, which you can give it different forms, but the lump itself persists, endures. This is a powerful distinction because later on it will develop into actuality or potentiality actuality. So from matter form, we derive actual potential. And here is a statement by one author that I appreciate. He says, the polarity of actuality and potentiality had carried perhaps half the weight of philosophical thought through all the centuries that elapsed between Aristotle and Aquinas. And you could say even beyond. I assume that you have some intuitive sense of what potential is. I mean, Aristotle says all humans by nature desire to know, right? You definitely would disagree. I mean, I know people who wouldn't desire to know, who would do anything but read a page. You need to kick them into reading a page. This is why Aristotle qualifies by saying potentially. All humans desire to know potentially, which means we have the potential to do that, but it is not actual. So, for example, you have the potential to be attentive, but in most cases it's not actualized. Can it be actualized? Of course. If Shakira walks in, you would be so perceptive that you could tell apart the different threads on her dress. Well, it helps that she doesn't have so many threads on her, at least the guys, I mean. Which means that we had this perceptivity or this attention in us in terms of a potential. The acorn has the potential to become an oak tree. It cannot become a pine tree. So this is related to the other notion by Aristotle, the notion of essence. I'll come to this. But this matter and form distinction is very central for Aristotle's causal analysis of things. So you become something, you move out of something into something else, means that you're coming out of potentiality into actuality. And if you want to know what something is, actually in a manner which is conclusive, Aristotle gives us his four causes. So obviously the material cause and the formal cause. Again, the form is something like the shape of the thing, and the matter is the stuff it's made up of, but not in a trivial sense. So the form of the key is very central because the form of the key determines whether the key opens or not. It's not simply the form. It's not simply the shape or trivially the shape. It is the shape because it's related to the function. And the stuff it's made up of, say steel or copper in this case, is also crucial for what the key is. So you cannot have a key made out of, say, water. Okay? So if you know the matter and the form, you'll know something about the key, what the key is. But you need something else. You need a final cause and an efficient cause. The final cause is the idea that we had in mind when we were making a key. What is the key for? It is there to open the door. So if you ask, what is a key? And you say, a key is something which opens the door, you've answered to the formal cause. If you say it's something which is made of copper, you've answered to the material cause, etc. And finally, there is the efficient cause. And the efficient cause is how it is made. The efficient cause of the key, in this case, would be the guy who built the key. Anyhow, this is the four causes in Aristotle. They'll come over and over as you proceed with the reading material. Another thing I want to discuss in Aristotle is his categories. Again, this is in the same thread, in the same line of causally analyzing things and classifying things. So he classifies, he says everything falls under one of the 10 categories. Categories in Arabic are translated as maqulat, so things which are said of things. So you can say of something that it is tall, that it is blue, that it is a human being, whatever. But whatever you say is restricted to these 10 categories. One of them is the essence or the substance, al-jawhar, and the other 9 are accidents, arad. The essence is really what the thing is in itself. It cannot be otherwise. If it is no longer, if the essence of a humanity is, say, rationality, and you find a human being who's not rational, then this is not a human being. But if you find a human being who's not, say, tall, then he or she might remain a human being. Okay? The Arabs, to remember the 10 categories, have this habit of putting it in verse. So you have Zayd al-Tawil al-Azraq ibn Maliki. Zayd is a substance. Tawil is an accident, and in this case it's the accident of quantity, al-kam in Arabic. Al-Azraq, quality, al-kayf. Ibn is a relation, nisba, and Malik is another substance. Okay? في بيته is the position in Arabic, al-ayn. بالأمس المتى, so yesterday, the time. كان متكي is the وضع, the position. And then في يده, possession, الجدة. غصن, another substance. لواه فالتوى, أن يفعل, أن ينفعل, to act, to receive. And these are the 10 categories. Okay? Whatever there is in this whole world can be classified or falls into one of these categories. And this is, again, very crucial for Aristotle's scientific theory. These are ideas that will come up in your throughout the course. Another idea from Aristotle, also from Plato, is their conception of the deity, God. You saw how central motion was for Aristotle. And motion has to start somewhere. So the God, according to Aristotle, is the unmoved mover. The God, in the case of Plato, is an artisan God or a craftsman God. He calls it the demiurge. And it shapes matter as it finds it. So there are 2 principles in a sense. And this applies to Aristotle and Plato. There is the God and there is matter. In the case of Aristotle, the God moves or sets this matter into motion. In the case of Plato, God shapes and gives form to this matter. These will be ideas that will be grappled with or dealt with by the later religious constructs, mainly Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, although it's older, but philosophical activity comes later. In a sense, these are major ideas from Aristotle, but Aristotle is definitely richer than that. And Aristotle became extremely influential, Aristotle, the one on the left in this case, because he was the teacher of Alexander the Great. We don't really know how influential he was, but we know that he had Alexander send him specimens from all over the world. And when he was kicked out of Athens when Plato died, he came back with a vengeance, because by that time, Alexander had occupied the Greek world and much of the world, actually. Alexander, definitely, the political power that he had helped contribute to the later influence of Aristotle. But the Hellenistic world that was created by Alexander has much more than Aristotle. So there is influence from earlier myths and religion The Egyptian myth, for example, if you see, this is the map of the world occupied by Alexander, which ends in India, and you see Egypt here, Alexandria, established by Alexander. And as he went east, Alexander went out of his way to visit the Amun temple or oracle in Libya. And his descendants, the Ptolemaics, completely adopted religious Egyptian religion and custom. So there is much at work here. Many cross-pollinations taking place between different systems of thought. And much of this cross-pollination took place in Alexandria and in Athens. There are all sorts of different philosophical schools, but there's also religion and myth. In Alexandria, for example, some 2 centuries before Christ, we had a major Jewish population, and we had a translation of the Bible into Greek, which is called the Septuagint, which simply means that 70 different translators worked on it, and they gave us one of the standard translations of the Bible. And in this case, you can imagine that in a city like Alexandria, you have Greeks, Jews, and Egyptians. So the Jew is expecting the Messiah, and the Egyptian who, with his reverence to Horus, the child of a virgin mother, Isis, who died and rose again as the sun god Osiris. And then you have the Greek with all this influence from Plato of a spiritual realm, all these coming together and speaking Greek. And this gives us a figure like Philo the Jew, for instance. Mostly he was a Stoic. I won't tell you what a Stoic is, but you can think of him as one of the major figures that prepared the ground for the rise of Neoplatonism that will become, as of the late 2nd, early 3rd century, the dominant philosophy. And Neoplatonism would mostly concern itself with reconciling Plato and Aristotle, but also transcending Plato and Aristotle. So you no longer have an eternal matter with which the unmoved mover or the artisan god will deal with. There's only one principle, in a sense. Plotinus, the head of this school at one point, calls it the one. And then you will have to account for how the world is created out of this one. In a sense, the world will be populated by so many intermediaries. And by 6th century, at the time of the Arabic or Muslim invasion of the region, this kind of thinking has really developed. We're not judging it, but it has developed in a sense and established itself as the standard kind of philosophy. So when the Arabs think of philosophy, they're thinking of Neoplatonism. When Augustine, who you will be reading, is thinking of philosophy, he has in mind Neoplatonism. And Neoplatonism's central theory is the emanation from the one, how the whole world, how multiplicity emanates or multiplicity is produced by a principle which is simple and unique in its oneness. This is one of the central challenges. Here's Plotinus in the middle. Maybe this is better. Anyhow, I'll just give you two small examples from the Christian and Muslim appropriation of this path of development. So back to Raphael. Remember the school of Athens that we saw earlier, which had Plato and Aristotle in the middle? Well, Plato was pointing upward, but the heavens were empty. And everyone was kind of moving forward. They're moving forward because facing that fresco, that painting, Raphael had this. So he's giving us an impression of movement towards Christianity, some understanding of history as moving forward. This is why it has eschatological connotations. But now the heavens are populated. You have God the Father, you have Jesus and Mary, the Holy Spirit. And this painting, which is called Disputation of the Sacrament, deals with an issue which cannot be properly dealt with philosophically. This is why St. Paul would say, Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, the power of God and the wisdom of God. So this is one religious way of dealing with the shortcomings of the intellect, assuming that in many places where religion and philosophy interact, you would have to say that the intellect has its shortcomings. In the Muslim world, we see an image of Aristotle. This is somehow historically peculiar because the Aristotle that the Arabs received after centuries of Neoplatonism was through and through Platonized. But he retains something of Aristotle. So if you look at the finger, it's not completely pointing upward, but there is an upward direction. And in the other hand, you see the astrolabe, which is a scientific tool. And this is the image of Aristotle, the first teacher, which was very crucial for Islamic philosophy. And Aristotle, nevertheless, was Platonized. Anyhow, you'll get a more thorough image of Plato and Aristotle in the Muslim and Christian world, in the Jewish world as well. And I'll leave you with this. Thanks. Okay. You can leave.